Yes, let's talk about it indeed. Welcome back to another episode of Elaborate. I'm your host, Jake Lloyd Bacon. Thank you so much for tuning in, for sticking with us. We're learning, we're growing, we're doing it together. Could not be more excited for my guest this week. He is an actor, improviser, sketch comedian, writer, and more. He has won not only the prestigious Andy Kaufman Award, but also our hearts as the writer and performer on the Chris Gethard Show, the hint master himself, Dru Johnston. Hi, Dru.
Hello, how are you?
I am fantastic, Dru. Thank you so much for doing this. Before we get into anything, before we get into all the questions that I want to ask and all the things I'm curious about, I got to say two things. One, this is the rarity for this specific program in which we've never met, we've never spoken before 2 minutes ago.
Literally 2 minutes ago, we've talked about Zoom audio and about microphone settings. Yep. That's the extent of what we've talked about.
Yeah, real. We go way back to 2 minutes ago, Tech Talk. Usually I have some semblance of, a relationship, even if it's just like, oh, we did stand up together once 7 years ago or something like that with a guest. This is not one of those instances. I do not know Dru at all. I reached out to Dru just cold and said, hey, please come have a chat with me. And he was kind enough to say, I'd be happy to do that. The reason I reached out to him and the reason why I felt like I was so excited to get this, Dru, this is a get for me. I don't think you understand. This is a get for me.
That's crazy.
After the year that I've had, this is a get for me. So listeners of mine are already familiar. They're already sick of hearing me talk about this. But the Chris Gethard Show archives may be the largest percentage of the things that kept me sane through the pandemic and that are continuing to keep me sane through the pandemic. Pandemic hit all of us in real different ways, in real weird ways. And I want to say maybe it was like June of 2020, like a couple months in, I started just to hate all movies. Mm-hmm. I started to just because every day, because we couldn't go any place, couldn't do anything. So every day, my better half and I, we would do work. And then at the end of the day, we would all right, well, what movies are we watching tonight? And it just became part of the routine.
Right.
So it stopped being fun. Like narrative escapism started being part of the problem. And I didn't realize it until I saw that I want to say that maybe they're the True TV episodes were on HBO Max.
Right.
And I threw those on, and it was like a warm blanket. And I realized it's because the people, it's the community. Like I didn't realize it. I had to sort of become self-aware as I was watching it. Like, why am I so obsessed with this right now? And it's because the show is literally a group of people all sitting around together. It's this giant family. It's it is the most antithetical pandemic thing that could exist, even more so than watching stand up, which obviously I started just watching more live stuff because you started craving the crowds. But TCGS is another step further where the community is the show, and there's it's such this. Again, I've been talking about this on various podcasts for the past year or so listeners are sick of hearing me rant about it. But really, the community and it was the best facility for being around other people when you couldn't be around other people. So thank you so much for all your contributions to that show. I have been absolutely obsessed with it since May or whatever it was. I have rewatched the entire TCGS archive.
Well, now, is this the first time you've watched any of them, or no? You watched them before, right?
So I was familiar with the show, and I would see clips, I would see stuff online. I don't think I ever saw an entire public access episode.
Okay.
In the history, I've seen segments of it and clips from it, which brings me to the double-edged sword of my new obsession with this program through the course of the pandemic, and what it's done for me is that, oh my God, the FOMO is just so heavy on my shoulders, because to think that this incredible program was happening and I was unaware of it and I wasn't partaking in it, I didn't become part of the community. This is one of those shows that you would have been hearing from me on the lines every week. If I was
We would have been in the booth screening your calls, being like, "We got one."
Yes, or you would have been like, Jake from LA wants us to play another thing. Like I would have been like pitching movies and bits, and I would have been trying to infiltrate the show in some way, shape, or form, just because. And that's a big thing of what I want to talk with you about today is like being part of that creative community, and that's something that I personally have always sort of desired, but I've never been able to cultivate. I've never been able to like look to my left and the right and see these people that are sort of I'm creating with. I've always sort of been the head of the totem pole, dragging people along with me, versus looking at partners all pulling the cart. Those were two completely opposing metaphors, but you understand.
Hey, metaphors are bad sometimes.
But yeah. But so I don't know, like you did cultivate such an incredible community, and I know I want to go back even further than that because I'm curious kind of where you come from and why you ended up how you are. But like, just tell me a little bit, like having that creative community for all those years, like what was that like? What did it feel like to be in the center of that? And were you even aware of it at the time, or were you just rolling with the punches?
Yeah, well, it's a little of everything in a way. Like I think honestly, what it is that community came from our time at UCB. Like, and that community like was kind of like institutional inside of how we would work together at UCB. Now there was a power structure at UCB, which should be commented on, and the fact that is one of the reasons why it's blown up in the last year. Not blown up like gotten big, but blown
I know
up,
the
like,
opposite
fallen
actually
to the ground. Yeah. It's weird that blown up can mean two different things.
Yeah.
But there was like a power structure there, but there was also this, because I started at UCB in 2007, late 2007. Okay. And even then it was like, there was definitely some power structures there, but it also felt like it was early enough in the UCB theater that like no one from the theater had gotten on SNL yet. I guess Rob Riggle had, but like this was even before Bobby was on. Right. So like no one had gotten SNL. There was no Broad City. There was no like the people who made it big were like Human Giant or
the original UCB.
UCB.
Amy. Yeah, exactly.
And the rest of it was us kind of like honestly just trying to like have fun and collaborate with one another, and like that's how I met most people when I moved to New York, was through that theater and through the classes. Like one of my best friends, another writer on Gethard Show, Noah, we were in a 201 together in January of 2008. And like after that first class, we went out to get a beer, like us and like, half the class went out to get a beer at, a bar nearby. And I remember, I've said this to Noah, but I remember thinking he was annoying as fuck. Like, it was just kind of like,
sure.
I was like, who the hell is this fucking kid? And also, he looked, 18 at the time, and I, for better or worse, have looked, 35 since I was 15. This is basically where I'm at.
And but you, and you might have just touched on the reason I've never been able to cultivate that is because generally the second I meet somebody and I go, oh, this person is annoying, then that's it. I'm done. And I think that's what turned me into a stand-up instead of into an improviser, a sketch comedian.
I think honestly that there is a bit of, because I got to know a lot of stand-ups and I couldn't handle the stand-ups because they were more insular in their own like pillars. Right. And like I needed to work because I come from a background of like theater and like experimental movement theater and like Shakespeare.
You did. Yeah, I was gonna say you did like weird experimental stuff back in Seattle when you were doing like Shakespeare stuff. So wait, we'll catch back up to this. So you're a Seattle boy, Seattle native or somewhere near Seattle?
Just outside. Like for anyone who's not from Seattle, I'm from Seattle. But for anyone who's from Seattle, I'm from Issaquah, which is 20 minutes outside. That's like
I tend to not explain it, but I'm from Long Island. And when you tell people, oh, I'm from New York, they just assume you're from the city. And I'm like, not even, it couldn't even be more different. But you know what? For the lack of not needing to explain it to you, sure. From New York.
If we wanted to get into like, because if I ever say like, well, where I'm like, and the annoying thing is I just started when I moved out to New York. I used to be like, I'm from Seattle. And most of the time they're like, great. But the reason I said Seattle was because when I first moved there, I'm like, oh, I'm from a town called Issaquah, Washington. And all they wanted to do, or even like sometimes, because I grew up in Issaquah, and then when I was in high school, Issaquah got too big from like Microsoft expansion. Oh, because we're right next to Redmond. And so my town got turned into a town called Sammamish, So like that was like in high school. So I used to always say I'm from Issaquah, and now I'm like, well, I guess technically I'm from Sammamish. But like,
Got it.
there was this. But so anyway, whenever I would meet someone new, I'd be like, well, I'm from Issaquah, and they'd be like, well, what the fuck is Issaquah? And then I was like, if I just say Seattle, it's fine.
Sure.
But then I ran into the problem of anyone I met from Seattle, I'd be like, I'm from Seattle, and then they'd be like, oh, what part? I go, well, Issaquah, and they would always go, you're not from Seattle. Like there was always that.
That's me. That's like when people, or even like from my family in Queens. People are like, well, that's not New York. I was like, listen, it's New York. Trust me. It's all the same. Yeah. But anyways,
well, I mean, you probably had the same thing of like when you were a kid, probably when you wanted to get to the city, you would go into New York City.
Yeah.
The same way we would like, it's
jump
like,
on a train.
Yeah. And we didn't have trains in Seattle because especially on the east side, there was some terrible person who lived in a very wealthy suburb called Bellevue who shut down any kind of mass commuter train that was planning on being built because they didn't want like the homeless coming to their very pristine place of Bellevue.
Right.
So they were like, no, shut down this train. And I think the guy who was like going to create that city, I think it's the same guy who even shut it down, maybe. The same person who shut it down, like also shut down one in Atlanta. Like it's just one dude who goes around city to city just ruining public transit. It's like, what the fuck is this guy's problem?
But yeah, but like what? So I've been to Seattle. I was in Seattle once for stand-up dates at Comedy Underground. Is that the name of that club that's there? The Underground? Is it the Underground something?
I mean, the comedy clubs that I know are the improv theaters.
Sure,
so
of
I
course.
knew.
Fair. Fair.
Yeah.
So, but when I went there, this must have been 2008 or 7, and in my brain, I was just like, Seattle, I can't wait. I was expecting like everybody just to be like Eddie Vedder. And like, I was just like, I was like, this is going to be people have always told me like, oh, Seattle, that's the place that you're going to really love. Cause I was like, yeah, I'm like this 90s grunge kid. And I'm like, this is going to be my life. And I showed up and it just seemed like everybody was just sort of a melancholy New Yorker. It like wasn't like the fun grunge spot that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
But what was it like growing up there? Was it like, fairly typical any America suburbia?
I mean, where I grew up, yeah. I mean, I was just telling this to a friend of mine. We used to like, there were two grocery stores called QFC, Quality Food Centers, that were like on the Sammamish Plateau where I grew up. And like in high school, we'd always be like, where are we going to go hang out? Either old Q or new Q. And it was just going to the parking lots of these like grocery stores.
Yeah.
And like my friends Jason and Kingston and Chris and I once, I think one of us turned 18, maybe it was Jason, and he bought us all cigars and we drove to the new Q parking lot, pulled out cigars, blasted Paul Simon. I mean, it was like, this is the lamest thing.
The Simon. You know what? It was perfectly normal until you dropped PS. Once you start dropping PS, then it's a little weird. But that's, you know what that is to me though. That's just suburbia everywhere. You're just described literally like me and my friends on Long Island. We work until everybody worked at Blockbuster because that was the place to work. And we'd close the store at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2. We'd do the same thing. Go get some crappy cigars like those like Black and Milds. Remember those like flavored? They're flavored with the wooden tip on them. We'd get those, and we would literally just go to like a diner. It's the only difference is that maybe it wasn't a supermarket, but we go to the parking lot of a diner.
Yeah.
And sit and listen to music and just
you guys had diners. We didn't really have diners. Weren't a thing. That's the weird thing about the Pacific Northwest is like there are some diners, but like when I moved to New York and everyone was like, let's go to this diner, I was kind of like expecting it to be so much more expensive.
Yeah, you're like from the movies? Like those things? Yeah.
Because every diner that we had, it was like, breakfast is $18 and this isn't like $2,000.
Sure.
Like it's way too expensive. And then we go to a New York or a New Jersey diner and it's like, oh yeah, you can get a pancake. You can get a whole lumberjack breakfast for like $7 or $6. Right. So that's a big difference. Is that breakfast wasn't really a thing.
Yeah, you weren't used to the fact that diners are just fast food restaurants.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because we had one Denny's and we would go to that Denny's all the time.
Right.
But that was it. That was the extent of our diners that we would go to.
So, I mean, in that case, then, like, I'm going to just paint the broad brush of everybody who's roughly I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming we're roughly close in age. Everybody who's our age, probably into all the same sorts of pop culture and comedy and being a generic suburban kid and trying to find an outlet. Like, were you a comedy nerd as a kid, or were you just like a funny kid? Did you always, did you have the things that you pulled from that were always like, oh, this is the stuff that brings me joy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we all liked. I mean, like Wayne's World was my favorite movie as a kid.
Sure,
like that,
of course.
I'm what 36 now. So
All right, so I'm 2 years older than you. In 2 weeks. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, but so like basically, Wayne's World was like my favorite movie for a long time. It came out when I was in a second grader or something like that. And I remember it was like the last year we had a babysitter before I was like, you guys are fine. You guys can take care of yourselves. And I remember making the babysitter watch Wayne's World with me, I think 50 weeks in a row. I made this poor young woman watch Wayne's World 50 times.
That's great.
But there was that. The one thing that I had in Seattle that's no one really talks about it, but there was a sketch comedy show that was on before SNL in Seattle. And I think, honestly, it was called Almost Live. And I think Almost Live probably shaped my comedy brain more than literally anything else. Because
that wasn't a like an SCTV thing? It wasn't a Canadian thing?
No, it was a Seattle. No. It was Seattle. It was like it was a local Seattle sketch show that like somehow, I don't know how they did this, on King TV or on King 5, which was the NBC station in Seattle, SNL would air at 12:05, and Almost Live would air at 11:35, and it's a show that Bill Nye got his start on. Almost of Science Guy fame.
Look that up. Joel
McHale got his start on there.
Interesting.
And the guy who wrote the movie Nebraska, I don't know if you remember that movie Nebraska. Bob, what's his last name? But it's Bob Nelson. He was like a performer on this show, but it was like a local sketch comedy show that was like, they had sketches like Ballard Driving School, which was just making fun of the neighborhood Ballard, and cops
real
from Kent.
Specific, right,
real specific shit.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I remember at one point when I was like in 4th or 5th grade, and I loved SNL too. We would do sketches. We had like a little camcorder, and I would do my Jay Leno impressions and stuff like that, and make my brother play like a guest on this Jay Leno show that I'd make fun of. And
great.
I remember though when I was like in 4th or 5th grade, I asked my dad. I was like, "Would you rather I work for Almost Live or SNL when I grow up?" And my dad was like, "Well, Almost Live, because that way you'll be close to home." And I was like, "Oh, that's sweet."
That's great. That's really yeah. Yeah, I didn't have any experience like that being a New Yorker, because it's like, oh, our local show is Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. I mean, New York is such a crazy place for Seattleites. We feel like it's such a different place.
And so I think though, similar to me though, like it seems like Almost Live was somewhat more counterculture than SNL was. So for me, that was in the early 90s. Like I was obsessed with The State. The State was everything to me.
Yes.
VHS taped every episode of that show. I would watch it just on repeat. We would do it like I would do sketches from it in like high school, like talent shows and that kind of, you know what I mean? Like, forcing people who have no idea what it was even to do it. But it's sort of like somewhat next to the mainstream, at least of the era. Nowadays, that stuff is that sort of comedy, I think, has infiltrated the mainstream. The shit we see on SNL nowadays is the crap that you were only seeing in small clubs 15 years ago or 10 years ago. Yeah.
Well, I think the weird thing is Almost Live honestly was probably more not my mainstream, it was local, but like the jokes were never weird. Like there was 1 or 2 sketches that were great that I visually remember being so funny. Like there was one that was just an ad for something called Mystery Meat, and it was just a commercial for something, and it was just this deadpan Bob Nelson going like, "What is it?" And they go, "It's a mystery meat." He's like, "But what is it?" They go, "Meat." He's like, "But what is it?" And it's just like that was the entire thing. And I thought that was the funniest sketch.
That does sound like my kind of humor.
They'd also had one of the band members from Soundgarden was frequently on it for this thing called Lame List, where they just had a bunch of grunge heads scream what things were lame. Was it Kim Thale? He's the long black hair. I can't remember.
I mean, that's all you literally described to every member of.
Yeah, I know. He had a beard. He had a big beard too.
Yeah, Kim Thale. All right. Yeah, that was my favorite. He was my favorite guitar player.
Yeah, but they would do these things where it was just like the Lame List or What's Week This Week, and they would just say like things like like I-5. They would just make fun of local highways, and then like some local budget reconstruction act, and then they would just have a bunch of grunge heads going lame.
Sure.
And it was like.
You figured what year is it? This has got to be early 90s?
Yeah, this was early 90s. And it kept going. I think that show got canceled maybe in 99, maybe. Okay, so but like it was around since like the 80s. Yeah. It was like this 15-year run.
And so you were doing bits, you were recording stuff, pretending to do Leno and stuff like that with friends. Do you come from funny stock? Do you come from funny parents?
No, my parents are both Boeing engineers, so I come from math and science people.
All right, which you know what? It tends to be one or the other. It tends to be nobody's like, oh, I'm real funny because my dad is just like he just has a good, decent desk job. It's always like, oh, I come from genius scientists or the funniest human beings on the planet, and they gave me that.
Yeah, I don't know why I got into comedy. I truly have no idea because I should have gotten into math and science. I was good at science. Like I was like, I think one of the top rated like chemistry students at my high school. And I remember I almost like, I think I was about to go to a college with like with a science, what is the word I'm thinking of?
Are you talking about like a scholarship?
Yeah, scholarship. Well, like, because I was like applying for like science scholarships, and then it dawned on me that I would have to major in science, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to major in theater, and I have no idea why. Like my brain loves. I was always terrible at English and history, and yet I insisted on that. Those were my favorite subjects.
Yeah,
and I don't know why.
Same. I was always like, oh, I wanted to, the things that I wanted to do, because you know what it is? I think that there is also that tiny little artistic bone that just wants to do the thing and not learn the thing.
Yeah.
And that was the way I was. Like I saw only two options for my entire life. I was either going to be a rock star or I was going to be the world's most famous actor. Like those were the only two things I had. But I had no interest in studying music history or studying and also as far as the acting thing, I didn't know you could. I didn't understand like how do you become an actor? Like there was nobody in my life that went like, well, you go to this school or you do this thing or you take a class. Like for me, it was just like, it wasn't a realistic, tangible thing for me.
Yeah. But I loved it, man. I mean, I would do, once I discovered theater, and I was a shy kid until I discovered theater in like 4th grade. And then I did like a production of like Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
You
it was
did?
Like
I can't believe your school did theater that little.
It was it was like a week-long after-school program during student-teacher or parent-teacher conferences. Like that week, everyone had half days because the second half of this elementary school, the first half was school, and then for the whole week. And then the second half was they scheduled parents to come in to meet with teachers for the whole week.
Interesting.
And they brought in this guy, Howie, who basically cut down Wizard of Oz to a 30-minute production. And
for a bunch of second graders.
Yes. I mean, a bunch of like elementary school kids. I was maybe one of the oldest people when I was 4th grade. And like,
was it for the whole school? Was it like the whole school's worth? Like was it whatever
school.
It was like 3 grades, probably like 2, 3, and 4 or something like that.
It was, yeah. I think there was maybe a few first graders, but we was a K through 5. So
got it. So it was a big. Okay, got it.
It was a big school, but like we basically all just went in, and the first day was just auditions, and the auditions
I was gonna say, did they make these kids audition? That's so terrible.
But
was it one of those things where everybody got a role?
Everyone got
regardless.
If you signed up, you were in it.
Got it.
But
so
like,
it wasn't okay. Got it.
Yeah, but to audition, they were like, "Who wants to be Dorothy?" And then like every girl stood up, walked onto the stage, and one at a time, they had to say the words like, "Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore," and they would just say that line, and that's how they decided who was going to be. What?
That right there might be one of the best sketch ideas I've ever heard.
I know, just a bunch of kids.
It's just a bunch of 2nd to 4th grade just having to say the same line as 100 of them in a row.
100 of them in a row.
Because you know what? It'll get real tired.
Oh,
and then frustrated, but then it'll become hilarious again.
Yeah, exactly. My little brother also insisted that all he wanted to do was play Toto. All he wanted to do was be the dog.
Did they allow him to play the dog?
Yeah. I mean, because he nailed it. He nailed that audition. But every part, it was like they were like, "Who wants to be this part?" And we'd come up and we'd do it. And then and my brother was sitting there, like my brother's 2 years younger than me, just sitting there staring. And then they go Toto, and he runs up and he goes like, "Ruh, ruh." He barks
amazing.
As loud as he can.
Was he on all fours?
Oh yeah, running around on all fours.
All right. Well, who did you play? Come on, stop delaying.
I played the Cowardly Lion. Which is
you know what? Yeah. I would have guessed it. I would have went Tin Man first, Lion second.
That's fair. Yeah, I think honestly it is. I've got a body type that just screams. I was the kid in high school who was playing all the 40-year-olds. Like this is just like the parts
Sure. I know. I know the type. We had one of those. Yeah. We had one of those.
So that was me. I went bald at 22.
You were the one often with the gray spray can in the back. That was
Always.
you. Yeah.
Oh,
That was
always.
you. Yeah.
Because I could also grow facial hair come 14 or 13. So
Really?
like I would
All
grow
right.
a goatee, and they'd be like, "Great, you can be the preacher in Footloose."
So you mentioned that you mentioned you started losing your hair in your 20s. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, and it's my senior year of college. You could see it starting to go.
Right on. Well, you know what? It's a give or take because I am 38 and still can't connect my mustache
Sure.
to my this is just I always say the same thing. I look like. Do you remember that episode of Beavis and Butthead where they glued the pubes to their face?
Oh,
that's
yeah.
that's what this is. That's what all this is. So it's a give or take. Although now that I'm 38, I am starting to notice that you can see through. It's going. It's leaving.
The nice thing about going bald at a young age is that you get over pretty quickly that you can't change the way you're going to look. Like
More time to accept it. That's what. That's a good point. I'm Alexandra, my girlfriend. She consistently is reminding me that I'm way too early for my midlife crisis. Even though I don't think I am, but I have become obsessed with how I think like my hair, like it's going, and I have like the spot in the back that you can't see here, but it, from behind, and I'm so self-conscious of it, and I wish I would listen, if there was a price you could put on the confidence you have, my friend, I would pay it. I would pay it gladly.
I don't know if it's confidence and more just acceptance. It's just
sure. You know
like,
what?
right.
I'll take either side of the coin as long as I'm okay.
Yeah. It's weird because like I remember thinking like when I first started going bald, I was like, well, in 5 years, this is a phase that I'll grow out of. It's like, you're not growing out of going bald.
Wait, you're going to grow out of it? It's like, yeah,
gone.
I'll only be going bald for a little while and then I'll be fine again.
I truly thought that because this is like, I'm a 22-year-old and I'm starting to lose my hair. And it's this thing where you're like, yeah, like if you injure yourself, it gets better. If you get like all these things that get better. I kind of figured my balding was going to end at some point.
Right, sure.
You just have to lean into it.
I will say you got a gorgeous head. Some people, I've had to shave for a role before. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm petrified of going bald is because I've seen what it looks like. Not good. Yeah. Not good under there. Not a great shape.
The after college, I did a movement theater piece in Seattle. And that's when I first had to shave my head. And
completely, yeah.
And completely, like with a razor for a few months. And it was... that was honestly the beginning of the end because I was already kind of going bald and it just never grew back after that. Like it never grew back in full. But I remember being like, well, I've got a nice round Charlie Brown head. So
again, it works for you, and the beard is beautiful. You're a beautiful man. So you're rocking the Cowardly Lion. And is this a point where you're just sort of like, yeah, I like this. This is fun. I like when people are staring at me.
Yeah, I honestly liked it a lot. I mean, that was it. And I started doing all of these little after school plays whenever they would come up, and it would be like a week long, program. They did Beauty and the Beast once, and I still think about this, and I am so embarrassed by it. But like, every time you would do one of these plays, they would have you'd start on Monday, and then Thursday night you would put it on for all the parents, and then Friday it would be a school assembly, and everyone would come watch.
I remember,
the assembly. So anyway, we did the Thursday night one, and as a fourth grader and petrified of girls, I had to like dance with the Belle. I was playing Beast, and I had to dance with Belle, and I was terrified. I mean, I was not terrified of this, but like also terrified about what my friends might think of me, dancing with a girl, And the next day when we did it in front of the school, while I was dancing with her, I looked over and I saw 4 of these like kids in my class all snickering while I was dancing with her. Oh, no. And I said out loud, I hate this part. And like I thought I was saying it quiet enough that only those 4 like dudes would have heard it. But my dad had taken a day off work and he wanted to come watch it.
Like a videotape in the back, old VHS,
he was in the back, and he was like, "Oh, Drew, that was loud enough for everyone to hear. You just you loudly said that."
Oh my god!
And I still think about how embarrassed. I mean, like I feel so bad.
I know for
this girl,
her too.
For her, like why did what does this say?
I hate this part.
I hate this part. It was and I think honestly at that point, my dad made enough fun of me for it that I was like, well. You just got to own everything you do on this stupid stage from here on out.
Did you become like a ham as a kid because of these
Yeah.
occurrences? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I became a ham.
you said your brother is just 2 years younger than you. Is that what you said?
Yeah, he's 2 years younger than me, and he wanted to do theater too. He studied it he studied it in college, and then he moved to New York. We were roommates for a little while, but he quit. He just quit like 5 or 6 years ago. He started working in tech, and he was like, "I hate this lifestyle. I can't handle it."
So he's significantly smarter than you and I.
Yes,
yeah,
completely.
Okay. That's good. Good to know.
I mean, completely.
But I will say this though, having a little legitimate brother partner like in all of your antics must have kind of inspired your ability to like work with other people and to just have fun and like also inspired your creativity. Because I always talk about how like my difference of like I'm 7 years younger than my oldest brother. We couldn't be more different. If you put two of us in a room with 98 other people of color and said pick the two brothers, you wouldn't pick the two of us as siblings. You would assume we were related to one of the other people.
Yeah.
Like I'm always like, gosh, God, like I had like my little cousins, I had other people as a kid to play with, but I feel like it wasn't until like they were all a little bit older and we could like drive cars to each other's houses that we actually started like having fun artistically, that we just started like making movies and like doing the kind of crap that you were probably doing with your brother throughout your entire childhood.
Yeah, well, I honestly think, I mean, most of it was with my brother. We would just like pretend to be like X-Men. We would pretend to be, or, we'd just play. We would just.
And did you also play the Beast in that as well?
I mean, honestly, probably. Beast was my favorite. So
yeah, I mean,
of course,
come on, Hank McCoy with like, I mean, he's my favorite.
I loved him. I knew immediately that it was a Frasier-like character before Kelsey Grammer played him years later.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so Zane is my brother. We would like play make believe, and we'd play Magic the Gathering a lot and Hero Quest and all these like games where you kind of have to do role playing stuff.
Sure.
And then it was just my friends from school that we would get together, and we all got to, through middle school and high school, we did plenty of theater. I'd always do summer stock, and theater became my thing. I mean, that just became the thing that I loved more than anything. And like,
and your super scientist Boeing parents supportive of the arts?
Completely.
Yeah.
That was the nice thing about it, is they loved the arts. Like when I was in 5th grade, they started taking us down every summer. We would drive down to Ashland, Oregon to watch the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Shakespeare Festival. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was the best. I mean, that's why I went to Whitman, was because I saw this one actor when I was in 6th grade named Dan Donahue. He was in like some terrible Tom Stoppard farce called Rough Crossing, and he was so funny. And he was like this huge celebrity to me. And I basically like looked up where he went to college, and he went to this college that was in my state, Whitman College in Walla Walla. And I started looking into that college, and I liked it. And I was like, and Dan Donahue went there, so that must be something good for theater.
Sure.
And like, smash cut to like 7 years ago, I'm at home watching the first episode of the NBC show BFF that like Lennon Parham and Jessica St. Clair.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh God, I love her.
I love
both of them, show. But yes, yeah.
And the final episode of the first season and the series finale, because they never went past that. They're like, they have to impress some big art guy, and it's Dan
him.
Donahue. He walks in. I recognize him immediately.
Sure,
he doesn't have a line. He doesn't even have a line.
Oh, really? Doesn't even?
No.
He's just a featured extra.
Yeah, and I've seen him play Hamlet. I've seen him play Mercutio. I've seen him play all the great Shakespearean roles, and he is the best actor I've ever seen. And I was like, this motherfucker can't even get a line. And it was really like traumatizing to me. I remember talking to Anthony, one of the writers of it, and he was back in the city, and we got drinks, and I was like, you should have given him a line.
Right.
You needed to give this man a line.
I mean, I reiterate this quite frequently on this and other programs. And this isn't to take away from the friends that I have that are wildly successful, but the most talented people that I know are not the most successful people that I know.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's always the way. I mean, it is. I mean, there's a little bit of it's a mixture of like talent. You need talent, but you also need the drive to keep working, and the belief in yourself that even if other people think it's bad, you think it's good. And that's one of the hardest things that I have in terms of like writing is, now that I'm no longer writing, and that's why I like honestly writing with other people, is because when you're writing with another person, you at least have one other person that you can be like, this is funny, right? And you know they'll tell you if it's not good because you've worked with them for long enough. Like when I worked with Dawn on my Billy Joel sketch show that I did for a long time, like there was one sketch that I wanted to do so badly, and at one point Finelli just said, "Drew, this doesn't work, and we're not going to do it anymore."
That's like, sketches from an Italian restaurant.
Yes,
is what you're referring to.
Yeah, sketches that a Billy Joel sketch show. Yeah, and it was I just wanted to do an entire sketch about him playing the piano and me singing Piano Man, and the entire sketch was me changing the lyric or me justifying why I was singing it, even though I'm not the piano man, because I can't play piano because I have too small of hands. Like I had this whole thing.
Yes, of course. Yeah, there needs to be too many factors involved.
Way too many factors.
Yeah. That's a Dru Johnston staple, is what I've learned.
I loved it. And eventually that sketch just became us talking about how good the song is, which is a very John Finelli staple.
That is true. There's something that I've learned as I've become such a huge Dru Johnston fan, is there's two types of Dru Johnston characters. There is one that is way too many moving pieces, or there's one that's literally just you came up with a name.
Yeah,
and that's as far as it went. Those are the two different types, and equally fantastic. There's no preference. Listen, there's something to be said about Dr. Heckle and Mr. Snide. Might be my favorite. Doesn't like. This is all we're doing. There's no more than this. It doesn't. There's no punchline here. No. It's just, chef's kiss for that one. But so you went to school also in Seattle or near Seattle? College?
It's in Walla Walla, Washington. So it was the wine region.
Sounds like a place. That sounds like something out of one of your sketches. I'm not gonna lie.
I know, right? Walla Walla, dude. When I studied abroad in London my junior year, and I remember telling this to this old British woman who was like a dialect coach because I was studying Shakespeare and theater out there, and I was like, well, me and my friend Rowan were both from Whitman and Walla Walla, and we were like, oh, we go to school in Walla Walla, Washington. And I remember her, I think she was drinking just gin in the middle of the day, and she just went, Walla Walla. Just was like so flabbergasted by it.
That's fantastic.
But it's like a 5-hour drive from Seattle. It's like right on the corner of Idaho and Oregon. So we would drive down we would host all the cast parties. So me and my friend Cooley would drive to Oregon to buy Everclear for cast parties. We were like,
so, and you went to school to continue to pursue theater. You went and basically. What was your master? Did you master in theater or in something
I got a BA. Yeah, I got a bachelor's of art in theater, and I was going to double major in theater and history. But then history, one semester you had to take a night class, and that would make it so that I couldn't do any of the plays. So I decided against that, just minored in history. And and it was kind of there that I remember there was, speaking of like a lot of people's parents always saying, like, don't do an arts, like you need to find a way. I think my parents knew that I wasn't going to be happy unless I was doing this. Like, I think they knew that.
That is incredible, Drew. That is like a godsend.
It was the best. I mean, they've always been like my biggest fans. My dad has been a huge critic of certain things that I've done that he doesn't like.
Good.
Which is great.
Because then it's not fake. It's not a blanket.
No.
Oh, I love you. Like, that's something that I've struggled with for ages, is like, my mom will tell you that she's my biggest fan. Like, but the truth is, I spent, 2 years of my life working on a film that she can't remember the name of. Right. So it's like, are you real? Like, your dad's paying attention. Your dad is like, not just is he paying attention, he has opinions.
Dude, my dad, after what was it? After I did Gypsy my senior year, I was like just a chorus member of the musical Gypsy in high school. And I walked out into the lobby after doing our show, or like the lobby, into the dining room of the high school,
right.
Where he's waiting. And I walk out and he looks at me and he said, you wasted 3 months of your life. It was the first words out of his mouth. And I just went, okay, Dad.
Wow.
Okay.
I mean, I've never met him, but I love him. I mean, that's fantastic.
He is a stubborn dick, and I love him a lot. But yeah, he was like that, and but the one nice thing about it is like going to college. Like, I remember telling my dad and my mom, like, I was like, well, I'm going to major in theater, and just to have something safety to like fall back on, I wanted to make sure that I could major in something else, so I'm going to double major in history. And I remember my dad looking at me and being like, Drew, what the fuck are you going to do with a major in history? Like, if you don't want to major in history, he's like, the only job what are you going to fall back on is like a diplomat? Like, he's
everybody always says like, you should end up becoming a teacher. Like that's sort of the thing.
Become a teacher. He's like, why would you do that if you don't? And I was like, you're right. And so I just majored in theater. And then, like they've as I've gotten older, they wanted me to find a way to get, more steady income, I think. But like, because it is, it's come and go. But they've always been very supportive in terms of what it is I do, and like they've seen me in my real lean years. Like they came to visit me once in New York, and I was like, hey, I got to take this week. Like, I know you guys just flew out here, but I have to teach improv for this week. Like, I just got an intensive, and if I don't, I'm not going to make rent.
Right.
And so they're like, that's fine. So they just would, occupy themselves every morning, and then I'd meet up with them at lunch and say hi, and we'd go on like long walks because it was cheap, and so.
And they were they a nice happy couple growing up? Like, it seems to me like you come from this fairly cohesive unit of a family.
My parents are wonderful, and they do love each other a lot. They are yin and yang in a good way. They really like. My mom cares way too much, and wears her heart on her sleeve, and cares about her family so much and wants to take care of it. But then the rest of her family like her extended family will often like criticize her for honestly, because I think they're jealous that she does too much, and then she will get very hurt by that, and she like really has a lot of emotion for it.
Right. And
my dad cares about nothing but himself and and then me and my brother and my mom. Like those are the only. My dad is my dad was 5'3". He is 5'3". He's like he's a very short guy, and he's got this thing that he puffs up. He always feels like if someone threatens him, he like puffs up, and like I call it pufferfish disease.
Right. Like, yeah, no, I get it.
But he all he wants to do is protect us. And he's always like, if someone does one of us wrong or something, he's like a very angry, he'll like be very, very defensive.
It's a real Papa Bear.
Yeah. And he doesn't, and there's he also like will say like he doesn't really care if someone hates him, or he's just like, well, what are you going to do? There are bad people in the world, kind of thing.
Right.
Or like, not everyone needs to agree with me. And my mom wants everyone to like her.
Right. I could see that shaping a pretty well balanced individual, because it's not just the one thing.
Yeah.
Like having your mom probably be like, oh, well, you should be concerned about this and this, and then having your dad be like, fuck all that. Like, it's probably a nice balance of like, all right, well, there's some honesty in both of these.
Yeah, and they had fights every once in a while, but they were like, I remember as like a kid walking in and seeing them fight, and it was just like, and it was just my dad crying, and it was like one of the most jarring things. My brother and I were upstairs watching like Looney Tunes. And like I heard something downstairs, and I walked down, and I just saw my dad crying, and that was like a very emotional thing where I was like, "Oh my God, my dad is human, and he does have feelings,
Right.
But the weird thing, my brother and I say this a lot about my brother, but like we both have equal parts of my mom and my dad in me, like or in us. But like I tend to be my dad first, then my mom after, which is just a terrible combo, because like if I get frustrated or mad, I'll snap at someone, and then within 10 seconds I'll apologize and feel very, very bad for the rest of the week.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to default to pushing away.
Yes.
And then trying to pull back versus
trying to be like, I'm so
versus
sorry.
default to maybe being a little bit too needy or pulling in too close, and then realizing, you know what, maybe screw you a little bit. Yeah.
And that's my brother is more of a like he's like, well, he will like he'll like be very caring and empathetic, but then at some point he'll just not care and he'll just cut off, and I'm like, that seems like such a better like place to be than where I'm at. But
right on. So at what point does Shakespeare stop becoming kind of a an important factor or an interest?
When did I get into it?
No, when did it stop becoming? Because I know you were doing that. Like you were doing that stuff in, like you said, you were studying overseas in school, and you were doing it in your college years.
Yes, it was 2 years into, maybe only a year into living in New York. I was doing. I moved to New York to do theater. I wanted to be an actor.
What year is this that you're moving to New York?
2007. So I moved here October of 2007, right after my years in doing movement theater or my summer doing a movement theater in Shakespeare in the Park. Moved to New York, wanted to be a playwright and an actor. And while I was there, I was like, oh, and there's also this comedy theater UCB. I might as well start taking classes. And then I was in a 201 improv class. That's where I met Noah.
That's where you met Noah, yeah, Noah Foreman.
We had a scheduled date of when our show was going to be. And I was also acting in some one-act festival.
Got it.
That called the Strawberry One-Act Festival, which is a scam of a one-act festival. But it was like, it was lined up so that I was going to be acting in that festival at like 2 that day. And then we had our show at like 4:30 at UCB. So I was like, oh, that's fine. It's a one-act. I can do it. Then I can get down there and be fine. But it was such a poorly run one-act festival that that we didn't start until 4.
Oh.
Like it was 2 hours late.
Right.
And not only that, everyone who we had told to come and buy tickets, $20 tickets, and which at the time, I was like,
that's a ton
22
for a one-act festival. That's
a ton
insane.
of money for just 2 hours of one-act festival. And it was also 10 degrees out because it was February.
Oh, no.
So all of these people were just sitting outside. They had already spent $20 waiting to get in, and it was 2 hours late. So by the time we had finished, I was like, well, I've missed the show. And I went down and I just met them all at McManus, the bar that we would go to, and I apologized to my class and to my teacher, and that was the day that I was like, I guess I have to make a choice now. If at that point I was like, well, none of this is paying the bills. Like I moved to New York with $7,000 in cash basically because I earned it all from painting houses that summer.
I was also a house painter.
Oh, it's
Look
the
at
best.
that. I was a house painter on the Gulf coasts of Florida. I started in Pensacola, and I would drive out to like Gulf Breeze, which is like all the rich people live.
Oh yes, we would go to Mercer Island. That's where the rich people live.
Because they paid so much more money than I deserved to paint houses, and it was just literally I would just put on a CD player, just listen to music, and just poorly paint someone's house, and then walk away. Oh man, fantastic!
I should have done that. I was working for my uncle, and I was getting paid like $8-9 an hour or whatever.
Right.
I guess by the end of it, I was getting like $12 an hour. But like my uncle, bless his heart, was just he was like had 5 houses going at a time, and we never finished any of them. We would just go to one house, and then the second that someone was mad at him for not being there, we'd move to that house, and then we'd move back.
Sure.
But like it was a decent enough job, and it was good to just zone out and just paint houses.
Right. So
I moved to New York with like $7,000 in my pocket, thinking that would last me about a full year.
Yeah, this will get me through a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
It's like that line It's like that line knocked up. Like, how much money do you have? I don't know, like $200. That should get me through a couple of years.
Through a couple of years, right? And this was like, because $7,000. That was the most money I had ever seen at that point.
Yeah,
I'm a college kid. Like our rent in college was $300 a month.
You were rich. Not only did you have a comma. Not only did you have a comma, but you had a comma 7 times. Not 7 commas, but you had 7 worth of a comma. I
was close to double-digit comma. Like in my brain, I was like, it's like you add $500 and then round up.
Sure.
I've had a 2-digit
If
comma.
you have enough money to buy a car outright, even if it's a crappy one, you're rich.
You're rich.
Especially
but then I
as an
moved to
artist.
New York, and I'm like, the first thing I do is find an apartment, and there's a down payment, and there's and I had to just sublet someone's room up in Washington Heights, and like I was subletting some room, and I had to pay like 1 month rent and
first and last,
and so I was instantly, upon moving to New York, down to like $5,000. Like it was like an instant, and then it only lasted a few months, and then I was like, oh, I have no money.
Right.
I'm just bone dry. And I was like, the options are either continuing trying, and I didn't have a job. Like I was touring elementary schools, like teaching them like the who, what, where of story with this company, and I was getting paid like $100 a show, but that was only like once every 2 weeks, so it wasn't enough to survive on.
Yeah, we have something similar to that. We have the Young Storytellers Foundation out here, although it's not pay, it's all donation, and like I've gone and donated days and stuff like that, and it's super fun and super rewarding. But even if it paid, it wouldn't be a job. It wouldn't be enough to do anything with. Yeah.
And this was also a thing of, I think the person who ran this was a kind of a scam artist a bit, and he like basically made 20 of us do rehearsals for like 2 months unpaid, and then he was like, with the promise of he's going to then sell these shows and make thousands of dollars, and we would each get $100. But then he ended up only sending 4 of us out, so 16 people had to just sit through like I think 15 hours of rehearsals and
for
never
nothing,
got any money
for nothing.
Which is I think a very standard, not standard, but like a classic story in this line of work.
Right.
But so basically, but then that one after that one act festival, I was kind of like, you know what, I don't have enough money to do both. Like if I wanted to live here, I couldn't do theater and comedy. I need to focus on one of them. And at least with comedy, the shows are on time.
Right. And I think there's a more immediacy to its rewards.
Yes. And with UCB, there was a clear structure of how and then once you get to the top, there's nowhere to go. And then it's a brutal mindfuck. But when you first get there, you're like, oh, this is how you can become a comedian as you go through these steps.
Yeah. I took improv in the early 2000s in New York, and I remember immediately thinking that it was like this incredible like a key that unlocks the world of the entertainment industry. But for me, the problem was I just never fit in. Like so in New York in the early 2000s is when I started doing stand-up, and I was obsessed with the alt comic scene. I was obsessed with like I would linger around the Invite Them Up shows. Like I was the kid who was like, on the outsides, like desperate to be, Dimitri Martin's friend and Eugene Merman and like that whole group of people who was like kind of lingering, but I could never do what they did. I always actually leaned more of like mainstream style, but mainstream comics, they're all assholes to me. So I was always sort of stuck in the middle. And if I was smart enough, I would have just realized, oh, you know what? If you would have just stuck with sketch or gotten into sketch, like this is where you can be both things. Like you can show your cynicism and you can show your humor this way, but also like it's so much more, I don't know, at least in New York, I can't speak for other cities, but at least in areas of New York outside of the obviously gatekeeping and all the stuff that we've now come to learn about used to be like, it's fairly nurturing. The environment, like you meet people and you work together and you want all to do things that succeed and to do things well. But
I remember doing it. One of the first shows I did was an improv stand-up. It was a stand-up improv show that we did. Okay. It was at the Duplex, which is odd. It was just a weird place for an improv show. I know it's like a great variety show place, but to do an improv show at the Duplex was kind of weird. Because a great stage for. Like I've seen my friend Larry Owens perform there, and he's unbelievable. And like it's just a great stage, but it was just not the right fit for four straight white guys doing improv. It just felt very weird.
Yeah.
But we did a show there called Stand Up Improv, and it was like a stand-up comic. It was kind of like a ASCAT kind of show where a monologist would do something, and then we would do scenes off of it.
Right.
But the guy who started it created it to be stand-up first instead of monologues. So we would listen to a stand-up set, and then we would do improv sets off the stand-up. And it doesn't work because fundamentally what we're pulling ideas from are already written jokes that have a clear premise already. So we're just rehashing them.
Also, any decent stand-up is going to extract as much as they're going to squeeze that towel and extract as much as they can out of whatever the premise is. Completely. So all you're going to do is either do the things that he or she decided weren't worth putting in the act. Yeah. Or just reiterating the same thing.
And so that was weird. But then I also remember at the end of that show once, we all were getting a drink afterwards, and the comic came out, and there was a moment where all he was doing was sitting there watching us, taking notes of us doing riffs, like just like shitty, like just making fun of each other and talking at the bar, and he wasn't engaging at all. And I think that was the moment that I was like, I don't like stand-ups. I was like, why is this guy not engaging with us?
It isn't a secret war. At least it used to be. I do think that people like Chris Gethard and Michael Birbiglia and I think they're some worlds have merged where like the alt comics, because I feel like there's stages. There's like mainstream stand up, then there's alt comics, and then there's the sketch world. And I feel like there's sort of a natural transition there, and it's merged. But at least for a long time, it was like skateboarders and BMX kids. Like you just didn't. And every time, and when I was doing stand up legit, when I was touring and like it was 5-6 nights a week for me, God, I would look down on all improv troops and improv, and honestly, it was tough for me to move out to LA and realize that. God, I mean, obviously, like working in LA and just trying to do commercial work, everybody's like, "Oh, did you take class at Second City? Did you take class at UCB? Did you take Groundlings?" And it's like, It's like, no, because I don't really like those people. And I feel like, at least I will say this, I feel like you did get in at a time when it felt elite, at least, and when it didn't feel like a machine. Nowadays, it does feel like, at least in LA.
Yeah.
I mean, I have many friends who are, who are still a part of Second City, and I've been to many, many shows, and it's quite clear that like a lot of these places, they're machines. They're just money machines turning over.
Completely. It's the problem. I mean, it's the problem with this industry, especially, is like, the second that anything like that starts happening, where it becomes a thing of you have to follow a structure, and if you don't follow the structure, you won't be showcased to the theater or whatever. Right. I really think it hurts any kind of artistic merit that you have. Like, I mean, the amount of times that I remember teaching classes at UCB in improv and sketch, and someone would bring in a sketch, and like, it followed all the rules. Like, it followed all the rules that we set forth, but it wasn't funny. Like, and I've written those sketches, like when I started, I was like, great, I'm following the rules. And it's this weird thing of like, I find it a lot in the same way that when you look at like Saving the Cat or Save the Cat or any of these like screenplay
the screenwriting outlines, or
and you're like, oh, they're really helpful because it feels like you have a structure that you can follow.
Right.
But if you follow it to a T, it's going to be one of the most boring movies, and everyone can see it from a mile away. Yeah. The same way that like game, honestly, at UCB and sketch in UCB sketch doesn't work unless there's something truly funny at the heart of it.
And it also it creates a brand of comedy, which is sort of problem. Like, it's kind of a bummer as a comedy fan, let alone somebody who's worked in the industry in some regards. Like, it's kind of a bummer when I can watch something that's supposed to be the counterculture, the thing that like, hey, this is what you're not seeing on TV. This is not the sitcom you're going to watch. It's not. Yeah. And realizing, oh, I know exactly where this is going to go. I know exactly what joke this dude's going to pull from, or this girl's going to say this at this time, because you've created a brand of comedy. You've created the UCB brand of comedy, or the Second City brand of comedy, or the Groundlings brand of character.
Right.
And that's not to say that there's not merit in those, but it does when they become the machines that they are, where they're just pumping out, especially in LA. And again, I can't speak to New York. I have not lived in New York since 2005 is when I moved away from New York.
Sure.
Whether or not it's one of my biggest regrets or the best thing I ever did, I'm still not sure about yet. Now, knowing what occurred with TCGS, I'm thinking it might have been the biggest mistake I ever made. But like, at least in LA, and so I spent a lot of time in Florida. I moved from New York to Florida, and I lived in Florida for 3.5, 4 years or something like that. And then I moved out to LA here in 2009. And in LA, it is very much like the amount of, now I'm just shitting on people. This is not what my show is supposed to be. I apologize. But like, the amount of people that I know that are like graduates of these programs that could not be less funny is abundant.
Well, you know what? If there's a weird thing about like, this is the other thing that is honestly the opposite that I keep thinking about a lot too, is that a lot of people also insist on certain things having already been done. And like, there is like a little bit of like, well, I don't want to do this. It's too similar to this sketch, or it's too similar to like something I've seen. And like, I do agree with that. And I've been a dickhead about that sometimes in like past sketch teams that I've been on, being like, I've seen this before.
Right.
But the one thing that I also wanted to emphasize is it goes both ways. Like, it's the best comedy that you're going to see is just from your own head, and whether or not you follow the same that structure. I mean, this structure of UCB and game is like, it's only theirs for when you have writer's block. Like, that's truly what it should be about. Right. And that's
a fallback.
Like, it's a fallback. It's like, I know there's something funny here. I can't figure out how to crack this open. That's when you go to your toolbox and use game, or even an improv scene. You just want to be listening and reacting. And then hopefully at some point your brain cracks open. You're like, I don't know where to go. Then I can go to game and getting the reps in. But there's also something that is to be said about like, I had enough students come to me and they're like, this is what I want to write. Or they would bring in a very funny sketch as they were learning the structure. Because I'm rambling, but like, there is like a thing of like, structure is important, like you can't watch a play of just people saying random funny things with
Of course,
absolutely no emotional
story has
stakes.
story has to move, whether dramatic or comedic or
and you need to understand that. In the same way, like a sketch can't just be someone just coming up and lobbing jokes and stuff like that. So you do need to learn how you handle structure and how you can actually write. And like a lot of that comes from you writing stuff that's been done before. And this is one of the big things that I think two of the big pratfalls I've seen people struggle with in terms of comedy is, one, they follow the structure and they think that's how you're supposed to be funny, is like, or that's how you're supposed to tell a story. There's only one way to do it, and it's this. It's the same thing as like when you're, I used to tell my sketch students that sketches are a lot like expository essays, where it's like, here's my game, this is my thesis, here's my first joke is a support, here's another support, here's another support.
Right, yeah.
But we've all read those 5-paragraph expository essays from when high school, and they're terrible.
Yeah, there's zero information that you can gauge beyond the first paragraph.
Beyond the first paragraph.
You can stop it after the first paragraph. Got everything I need.
Fine. Yeah. And so but it is like you need to learn it at first, and then you can break away from it. And so like I do think there is a little bit of learning it at first is important, because you just need that tool in your toolbox. But the two times that I've seen people have trouble with it is, one, they only follow that structure and they think they have to follow the structure, and anything that doesn't follow the structure isn't good.
Right.
But like, if funny is funny, and if it breaks from the structure and it's funny, that's great.
Right.
But then other people I know who have refused the structure so adamantly that they won't learn it. And there is a little thing of like, sometimes you have to write stuff that not you've seen, but that might have already existed. Right. Because like that's how you learn, and then only after you've done that a few times, you can break away and you can write your own stuff. And it's different for every single person. One of my old students at one point said like the worst advice he ever got was that people saying that the first stuff they write isn't going to be good, so you might as well write whatever and then you'll get good eventually. And I was kind of like, I think I told you that, but I also
sure.
I also wanted to make it emphasize it clear that like much of that is taking away the pressure, like just making sure that you can write something bad.
Don't assume the first thing you write is going to be bad. Just don't be precious with it. Don't think it's the best thing you're ever going to write. There's a difference. There's a fine difference between the two.
And don't get mad if someone like the amount of people in like sketch classes who have like given a good joke, or like in my sketch teams have given a good joke and then the writer won't put it in because they didn't come up with it, is like insane to me, because it's like, this is a group of people who are trying to make a show better. Take everyone's advice and like just listen to it. You'll know in your gut if it's not going to work, and then you just don't put it in, but you say yes, and then you don't put it,
Sure. Well, we're kind of at a point where I'm usually stopping these, but I still have so much more to talk about. Do you still have a couple more minutes to chat?
Dude, yeah. I mean,
all right. So
it's a pandemic. I've got nothing.
It's a good point. Where the hell are we going? I'm literally in pajamas. I did not put on pants for you, Drew.
I have not showered
I told
today.
I told you you were a get. Not enough for me to put on pants though. So I got to get to it, because I really want to talk a little bit about TCGS and about the experience of working on this program that, again, man, am I bummed I wasn't in the in crowd, aware that this was happening when it happened, because I do think it might be the most special comedy show that's ever been made. As far as quote sketch or whatever it is, in my opinion, the Chris Gethard Show is the best live comedy program that's ever existed, because it continued to be insanely unpredictable. It continued to be quite groundbreaking as far as I'm concerned. And also, it's the only show that I feel truly encapsulated what comedy is supposed to be as a TV show. And the irony being, it seems like the struggle of the show was to be bigger, was to get more. You had like the Comedy Central pilot, it seems, and all of these like hurdles, and the show wanted to be this big great thing. And the ultimate irony, and maybe this is kind of a soft spot, I apologize, but like the reason the show was so good is because it wasn't that. Right. And because it was the most punk rock thing that could have been, which punk rock and comedy are just, the same brand of two different, art types. So you met Noah Foreman and UCB. How did you then get involved with what became TCGS? Because I know the show existed at UCB. prior to becoming a public access show.
Yeah, so it started at the theater in like 2009.
Right.
I didn't know Chris at the time. I think I had maybe I had taken one class with him, but I did not do well in that class. I was really scared. And
Respect for the admission.
Yeah. I was terrible in that class. I mean, there was a lot of me being scared. I was going to I had gotten a note early on that I was like trampling people in scenes, and I was like, oh, okay, so I'll just stay back. And then because of that, I took the note too hard and I went too far one way.
Yeah, and then you stopped contributing. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, completely. But then basically, so that show started, and enough people I knew were like friends with Chris and had taken classes and gotten along with him really great. And then after that class, or after that show had started, I got put on a UCB team, Sandino, back in like 2010.
Okay.
And a few months later, Chris offered a class that was called Parentheses, was the title of it. And I think he named it Parentheses to be the most, what is the word? The pandemic brain is really hitting me.
That's fine.
Not snobby. What is the word that I'm thinking of? Like artistically above it all.
Pretentious?
Pretentious. Yes,
there you
exactly.
Go.
He
there
wanted to be the most pretentious thing he could.
Sure. Yeah.
So he named this.
It is very pretentious.
Incredibly pretentious. There was 28 of us in that class.
Okay.
We did some bizarre shows. Some of them were good. Some of them were not. It was a very fun class, and I met a lot of great friends in that class. That's where I met Murph. That's where I met Connor Ratliff. That's where I met. I guess I knew most of the other people, but like Dawn and Noah and me and Jesse Lee and Nicole Drispel and Sarah Claspel and Jackie Jennings. I mean, we could go on and on for the people in this class. But JD was also in that class, and JD was a friend
Amato, who was the director of the program.
Yes, and he was a friend with Chris.
Right.
And there was a guy who was in the community at the time named Keith Bethay, who worked at MNN, the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and he kind of came up to Chris after Chris had done a few shows at the UCB,
the live
that
ones
were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they started plateauing a little bit. And Keith came up to Chris and said, "Just so you know, like if you go to Manhattan Neighborhood Network, you guys could just put up a show and have a camera crew that's just there for free, and it's like a free way you can live stream it and get more of an audience." So Chris kind of wanted to do that. He reached out to JD to direct it because JD had just graduated from NYU.
Okay.
And then me and Noah were very good friends. We had written a few sketch shows together, and Chris got along with Noah really great at that point, and I was doing very well in the class. I would say that Chris was definitely more friendly with Noah at the time than me.
Okay.
But
you trampled on people a lot. And
I trampled. I was a bad student.
Yeah.
But after class one day, he just asked if me and Noah wanted to go to a diner with him, and we went to a diner with him and JD, and they asked if we'd be interested in like show running this new show that they were putting together. They wanted both of us because we could kind of complete each other's sentences a little bit, and like we'd worked together for so long that we could easily serve as one person kind of on a set with a lot of moving parts.
Sure.
And that was it, basically. He asked, we took a day to think about it. We told him, yes, absolutely. And then we started the public access show. And then from there, we all started meeting every week to go over what we wanted to do. We all kind of developed our voices there.
Right.
And every week, whether it was ready or not, we put up a show, and we had, a lot of fun. That's the start.
And yeah, one of the things I think that, again, I mentioned it at the opening of all this, was the things that makes it so special is the communal nature of it. And like the fact that the crowd, like the decision to put the crowd on camera, and I don't just mean have cameras pointing at the crowd. I mean literally put them behind you, put them so close in front of you that you can see multiple people from the front. You know what I mean? Or you know, like, and it is one of those things that it feels like the sort of show that you shouldn't be able to watch on TV. It seems like the kind of show that you only get to experience when you show up live.
Yeah. It feels like an adult. It feels like an adult version of like an old Nickelodeon show or something like that. Something bizarre.
Yeah,
where people are
well put. Yeah.
That's what JD always wanted. I mean, that's what JD's.
You can't do this on TV. It's just for adults. Yeah. And a lot of the things you did, you literally couldn't do on TV otherwise. Yeah. And so like, working in that environment and sort of creating this, I mean, there's a lot. Like it's one of those shows that there are so many, there's so much lore to the show. By the time it reaches whatever episode 1, whatever, even when you started season 2 at episode 140 or whatever it was, decided to start season 2 after having a whole episode about whether or not the show should even continue. That's, you know what? I'm going to sideline what I was going to say. I want to talk about this for a second, because this is another thing that I struggle with as an artist and as a creative. The reason that I do this podcast, the reason I started Dragon Wagon Radio, which is this podcast network made up of now 20 some odd shows, is because I've been living in LA for a decade, and 4 or 5 years ago, however long it's been since I've been doing this, I think we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary next. Shit, that's like 2 weeks. Crap, I'm bad at planning things. I think you're hearing this after our 4-year anniversary of Dragon Wagon Radio.
Hey, congratulations on 4 years. We've done it.
Thank you. I planned this. This is a special 4-year anniversary episode of Dru Johnston. Shit, I'm bad at this. Anyways, the reason I did all this was because I was just so sick of consistently being told by my management that like, because all right, so my management is also the management, or was, they're not managers anymore, but for like a really very well known like influencer, a YouTube personality.
Got it.
And so they started having a lot of success with said person, and so their way to handle all of their talent became, you should start a YouTube.
Yes,
or you should vlog. You should think, I don't have enough social media followers. I don't have enough, like all of this. And I was so sick of like being told I needed to do all of this extra stuff just to do the thing that I like and the thing that I want to do, which is act. Like I'm good at this thing. I like doing this thing. It's the most ridiculous industry in the world. Like if you go to a mechanic, and you go like, look, I'm glad you can fix my car, but how many Twitter followers do you have? Like it's a weird... It's a bizarre thing to do, but that's the industry. I digress. So the reason I started the podcast was because like, here's the thing that I can do. It feels sincere. It doesn't feel like I'm putting on a front and doing like, hey everybody, welcome to the Jake vlog. And this week I'm going to take my dog for a walk and talk about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich I made, like forcing myself to do something. I was like, I can, sit down. I have a background with podcasting. I used to podcast in the early 2000s with a buddy of mine over in Florida. And like, I understand the concept. I feel I'm decent enough with communicating with people, even who I've just met. And like, this is a way that I can be who I am,
right,
and put out something honest that hopefully enough people will listen to, that will increase my profile or whatever. Right. And watching the TCGS over the course of this pandemic, not only has it been the warm blanket because it's like I'm a part of a community, but it's also reiterated to me that like I can just be who I am and be transparent about that. The fact that you guys have on-air conversations about like, are we done? Like, has this run its course?
Yeah.
Like nothing, you're never gonna see like, maybe you'll hear like, you'll hear like Dan Harmon on a podcast talking about like, oh, well, I thought with, community, it was weird and this, and like, you'll hear the drama backstage.
Right.
But they're not going to put a show. You're not going to get an episode of The Good Place called Should We Continue the Good Place?
Right,
where everybody sits around and talks about the merits of doing the show or stopping it. And there's a level to that. Like there is no fourth wall in the Chris Gethard Show. There's no fourth wall. And a part of that so much, like I said, is the community. And so what was it like even just working with somebody like Chris, or I'm not even sure how much of it was just him. It did seem like, at least from my perspective, that a lot of people are sort of like, is this even a thing anymore? Like, what's it like being so public with a piece of artwork?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is Chris. A lot of that comes from Chris. I mean, Chris is a very open, like that's part of his like comedic voice,
his appeal,
is being open and talking, and Beautiful Anonymous is largely just him listening to people and then him rawly giving his feedback on it and just listening,
Right.
So it was definitely Chris. There was like some feedback from, a few of us on the back end who were kind of like, we're running low on ideas. And like, the other weird thing about it is like, I think it wasn't necessarily like, what do we have to do? It was at that point, I'm trying to remember where we were at, but I was always of the mindset that we needed to keep changing the show and we couldn't get stuck in a rut. and I think Chris was also in that mindset.
Sure, yeah. And that's, I mean, that happens any live show, that even if you're not on TV, that's just any live show. Eventually, you show up every week, and you don't want it to become part of like I was saying earlier about like watching movies, and what got me into like rediving into this archive was like you don't want it to become part of your what was the word I used earlier? Not part of the schedule, part of the routine. You never want routine out of artistic outlet.
Well, it's the same reason why sitcoms it's the same reason why like in sitcoms, at some point, like Jim and Pam have to get together, or they have a kid,
and then when they get together, they have to break up or do the next thing,
next thing. And it's it's this fight about like, especially in a show like that, is like what got us here. And then versus like, well, how, like, you can't keep doing the same thing, which is also like, when your management was saying things like you need to follow YouTube or just get a social media presence or anything like that. Like, everyone's story is different. Like, no one has any way to be like, I would be a terrible YouTube influencer. Look at me. I would be terrible.
I've said this so many times, like there's maybe 50 years ago, there was a pretty clear path to the thing, right? Nowadays, there is no clear path, and what works for, A isn't going to work for B, which isn't going to work for C, and isn't going to work for D. Like, everybody's just going to do the thing that they do. And also, like, what even is fucking artwork anymore? You know what I mean?
Well, like, I mean, it's even 50 years ago, everything was different. Like, some people had certain ways. Like, the way that Warhol became famous is so much different than the way, Carl Reiner became famous. Like, one of them worked his way up, and one of them was just painting Mao.
Yeah.
So I think like largely what it is like, you just have to, the ones that always rise to the top are the ones who are true to themselves. And also it's this thing of like, certain things we have in our brain, and I think social media does this a lot too, is like we measure our success based on like how well you do on social media, or like, did your tweet go? I saw someone tweet the other day, I don't even remember who tweeted it, but it was like they tweeted like a conversation with their mom, and it was like, well, I had a pretty productive day today, and they're like, and then my mom says, productive in a real sense or productive because a tweet did kind of well? And there's like, productive because a tweet did kind of well. And it's like, that's not going to get you anywhere, like, it will, you slowly accrue followers, but like, that's not a path to success. Someone else I saw tweeted, I'm addicted to Twitter clearly, but someone else like tweeted the other day, like,
we all are. We've been in this thing for a year, dude. We don't have an option. Man. I know, it's the worst.
But someone else tweeted, like, I think it was Mary Sasson maybe who tweeted this, but there was someone who said, this is also bad because I can't remember who tweeted anything. It's like this it's just a blob. But they were like, 10 years ago, 2 people got jobs from Twitter. And since then, all it's ever done is fired people. But all of us are still clinging on to hope that we might be the same 2 people,
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
But there's something about like, I mean, honestly, it reminds me a lot of like when I first moved to New York and I wanted to get on a Herald team, and I auditioned to get on a Herald team. I didn't get on a Herald team. And I was like, if I could just get on a Herald team, I'll be successful. And like, I didn't get on a Herald team. I saw someone else get on a Herald team. And then later they posted on Facebook how they didn't have any money and they desperately needed a job. And if anyone had a job up opening, and I was like, oh, wow, just because you get on Herald Night doesn't mean all your problems are fixed.
And there is a lot of that too. There's a lot of that assumption that like, once I blank, then all of my dreams come through. And whatever the blank is.
Never the case.
And that's a realization I had years ago when I was, acting in like everybody's student film alive. And when I was just like doing like the whatever acting work I can get. And I was realizing like, oh my God, like the only things I'm getting are terrible. That I think that I'm the guy who sits around on set and I go like, oh, actually, I think I kind of know more than what this director, or not even know more, but I feel like I have an opinion that I think could make this better. And then realizing at some point, like, I don't like the roles I'm getting. I don't like the things I'm in. And realizing like, oh, if I want to be in a thing that I like and I'm proud of, no one's going to do that for me. Like, I need to do that myself.
It's a lot of, it's that. It's also, I do think there's a lot of like, I often have to remind myself, if I was a 10-year-old and I was telling you the 10-year-old self what I've done, like, and like, I would be ecstatic by where I'm in, but I'm still, every day I wake up and I'm like, why isn't this person emailing me? Like, there's that.
Sure.
But you just have to like reframe it sometimes. But even speaking of going back to the Gethard Show, like why we were talking about like just why do we want to move on or what do we want to do? Largely, it came down to the fact that I think for a few weeks, it was only honestly a few weeks, but weeks felt like years sometimes. And like those few weeks, we felt like we weren't doing anything new or exciting and we were kind of bored by it. And it was, if we were putting a lot of effort into it and still being bored, was it worth it to do it? And, you know, like, there is something a little like putting it out there to be like, I think it's funny to put it out there to be like, should we still keep doing the show?
Yeah.
But there is inherently a little bit about like, we know that people will say,
of course,
please do it. So there is that.
But you know what though? Like that's the most honest thing because we're all trained to believe like the thing that, oh man, there's a saying that I hate more than any other saying. And it's one of the reasons I hate it is because I use it frequently, which is act like you've been there before. Like that saying, I get it because appearances are important and presentationally, you know, everything is important, but simultaneously, like it's totally okay to be like, is anybody listening? Mm-hmm. Is it like I need you to refill this cup of confidence that's been emptied because I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
All of who I am to do a thing. So it's totally honest. Like that's part of the honesty. Part of the honesty is being like, hey guys, tell us that we're really great and you love us so that we continue to do this.
And there was definitely some of that. I do think, if I remember right, I honestly think Chris was alarmed at my reaction of that episode where I was like, I think we need to blow it all to the ground. Like,
right. Yeah.
That.
Phoenix from the ashes.
Yeah, like a phoenix will rise. And I think I really did feel that because I was like, no, I think like, we have to keep moving forward. We can't just like rely on what's been working for us. We got to like look back and what is it that we want to do. And we got to refocus. And I don't think Chris was ready for me to say something like that, if I remember it, because I remember him looking at me like, "What the Drew?"
Right.
Wait, am I the one who's? I felt like this was a fun idea.
Right. Sure.
But I do think like, but I mean, you know, this is. I think that episode is a microcosm of what we all deal with in our artistic life, where you get stuck in one thing for a little bit too long, and then you need to go back to the drawing board and figure out why you wanted to do that in the first place. You know, like it is like, for me, there was a lot of like, I've had success in like the sketch world and stuff like that.
Right.
And I was kind of like, well, what do I want to write more? I guess I'll keep writing some sketches and try to maybe like make a new sketch show. And then there was this moment where I was like, no, but I got into this like to tell stories and to do longer form stuff. And like you can't tell stories in sketch. Like in fact, the one note that you always have is there's no story in sketch. It's just one guy saying one thing and then everyone shitting on that person. Yeah. So that's sketch comedy. Yeah. And so I was kind
live
of like,
from New York.
It's Saturday night. It's just us shitting on Ted Cruz, which he deserves it. But
sure, absolutely.
But like there is like a little bit of like, no, I always wanted to write stories and I always wanted to do like bigger things like that. And the way to do that is just to write longer stories. And it's hard because like I don't have the same skill at writing a longer piece than I do a sketch.
Right.
Because it's just practice. And it's one of those things of like, I wrote a pilot, and the first pilot I wrote was well received, and it started getting passed around. This was a few years ago, and I was really excited. And then I wrote another pilot, and it was dead on arrival. Like no one wanted to read it. Like my reps at the time were like, "This is not sellable," and I didn't want to hear that.
No, because you wanted to continue riding that high horse of your first one of being like,
But at some point, you just got to accept it's like I'm new to this. Like a lot of it's the same thing of like. The amount of sketches I had to write before any of them were good was hundreds of sketches. And I'm not going to write hundreds of pilots, but like you have to write a few pilots before you get one, or at least that you can churn them out in a fast way. And I also think back like one of my favorite things I ever got to do was play like Tom in the Glass Menagerie in college, like doing like a Tennessee Williams play.
Sure, yeah.
And I could never do something like that on a sketch stage. Like And I was like, I would like to.
Well, you are a talented dramatic actor. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about comedy, but you've popped up in you've popped up in comedies playing straight men. You've popped up in Crashing, thoroughly enjoyed. Yes. God, I love that show so much. I love Pete. Popped up in Orange Is the New Black, and like you're putting work in outside of comedy, so that's great. But I want to talk about this really quickly. Is what we didn't touch upon was Improviser Seinfeld, was your work as Dr. Turkey, all these great live comedy things that you do. First off, Improviser Seinfeld, that was a weekly show.
It was monthly. We were doing
it was a monthly show. Got it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is something that is even on. Is it done or is it on hiatus?
I mean, it's as close to done as it will ever be, mostly because half George and Elaine are on one coast and Jerry and Kramer are on the other now.
Got it.
So, because
yes,
Catherine moved out to LA 2 years ago, and I moved out like 6 months ago.
Yeah, you moved mid-pandemic.
You're
one of the 4 people who came to LA in 2020 and didn't leave it. There is a for rent sign in every single building in my neighborhood.
It honestly was a great time to come out, but I also know it was mostly like my wife and I were living in a 450 square foot apartment in Park Slope, and we were which was fine when we got it. We were like, when are we ever home? But then. Then when the pandemic hits and you're like, well, you have to be home.
Sure.
And it was like we couldn't do multiple Zoom calls if one of us had to go for a walk.
Right. Because you literally couldn't be in the same room.
Couldn't be in the same room. And it was basically a one room with a sliding door.
Sure.
And we were like, well, when our lease is up, we either move up the street to a bigger apartment and then figure out, or we move across the country.
Try the coast.
And we might have to move across the country in a year anyway. And we were kind of like, let's just bite the bullet. Moving's going to suck in a pandemic no matter what.
Right. well, so the reason I say is because I feel like, live events, not just comedy, but live events, obviously the way of the dodo as of right now because of the pandemic. And I think the feeling that I had that made TCGS so emotionally grounding for me this past year, and I didn't touch upon it, but it's been a rough year. Rough year. I have a very senseless depression scale where it's not, my depression isn't predicated on good or bad news or a status. Mm-hmm. It's completely uncontrollable, and the pandemic just added to that because there's all these other things that are compounded on top of it that are organic, that are just your day-to-day stresses. And then all of a sudden it's like, shit, it's going to be one of those weeks.
Yep.
And so
you can't do anything. I had a week like that last week where I was like, I couldn't do a thing.
And that's why I was able to get through 100 and somewhat episodes of the show in how many months, because there are some days where it's just like, oh, what did you do today? I watched 10 episodes of TCGS while attempting to either write something and half paying attention or whatever. But anyways, my train of thought I was getting at was really just feeling that the need for the people, because we are so separated. And I'm at a point now where the pandemic has sort of helped me realize how much I miss an audience. So I stopped doing stand-up, I never quit stand-up. I just went from doing 4 nights a week to doing 3 nights a week to doing 2 to doing 1 every week to doing 2 a month to not doing it. It was like that. It just, and a lot of it for me was, I think it was the people. When I went from being and this is just a thing that everybody has to deal with whenever they move. I went from being a big fish in a small pond in Florida to being a who gives a crap about this guy in LA. I couldn't quite find my group, which is a common theme in my life. I've never been able to quite, find that group. And I just felt like I was spinning wheels. I wasn't enjoying it. I felt like I started to question whether I was doing stand-up so that I could get more acting work, or if I was doing stand-up because I love stand-up. And it was that sort of thing. But I'm undeniably missing an audience right now. And my girlfriend keeps saying the Roaring 20s is going to be a real thing again because of the pandemic. She really believes that it's going to be that thing. And I'm at a point now where we used to do a show on the network here called the House Show, which was it was a concert series. And we would literally fill up people's homes with a live audience of 20 to 40 people, depending on how many people they would allow us to have. And to just do a live, it was, hosted by a really incredible guy named Zen Zenith, and he's a musician himself, and he would just have on great musical guests, and it was like storytellers, but a podcast. They'd play music, and then we do an interview, and it's incredible how that just from a couple years ago to me is like, oh my God, I'm desperate for it again. And so I feel like I'm at a point now where I feel like, man, the writing is on the wall for me. I feel like I really want to do something again with a live audience, but it is weird because it also does feel like not a step back, but it feels like I've been working in film so long. I released my first feature this past year and I'm working on my next one. And it's like, that does seem like the sort of thing where I'm watching TCGS being like, oh, these people are all talking about how hard this is to do all the time. And I'm like, desperate for it. But do you feel the same thing, or are you actively concentrating elsewhere?
No, I mean, yes, I would love to be able to sell a script I love acting on TV. I love acting in film and like camaraderie of cast, but there is also something that I need. Like it's not a disease, but like you need a little bit of that reaction, or even just some validation, And there is like a little bit of like, throughout all of this, all the ups and downs of me in New York, I would be able to perform every Saturday night with my team Grandma's Ashes. And like, if something went badly that week, or, if there was if I had a bad week at work, or, a script that I was sending around got like, just dead on arrival or something like that, or something didn't pan out, I could always remember that I could go talk to Ryan and Abra and Brandon and Josh and Morgan and Lydia and Winston, and like we could be there every Saturday night at 10:30, and we would stay out till 3, every night, and we would like be able to get audience reaction.
It's the family dinner table too.
Yeah, and we would do it in front of people. Like there's something that like just doing improv or doing stand up or doing something in front of a crowd makes you realize that you're not alone, and that you do have some talent. Because I do feel like all I'm dealing with now.
By the way, not talent.
Not talent. Some talent.
Some talent. There's enough talent to warrant Joe in the third row to laugh, and his girlfriend Samantha to chuckle. Like I got to laugh and a chuckle.
Yeah. You're not going to be for everyone. That's fine. No, but there is something that like it reminds you, because like throughout the pandemic, one of the hardest things, and this is in the artistic arts, it's like. The artistic arts.
Opposed to the unartistic arts, which is a thing nowadays. You know what? I'm gonna assume what you just said was perfectly valid.
There we go. But like in the arts, like all of us doing this, we have a certain set of like, we have a little bit of an ego, and that's why we're doing it.
Right.
But also that's not the only reason we're doing it, but that is something about it. But there is also a little bit of we like most of us have a very open heart. Not everybody, but like I think a lot of people are like very emotionally vulnerable, and like having any kind of like feedback about like this makes you sometimes feel like, oh, maybe I'm just not talented. Like one of the things that I've been doing over the quarantine, and it's been very rewarding, but like is I've been organizing scripted podcasts with the WGA, and like I'm kind of leading this charge for people who are like writing plays for radio or for like Audible or for Spotify. Me and my friend Matt Kleinman kind of started this, and now it's got like 500 people on a listserv, and like we've got like organizing meetings, and like it's an actual thing with the help of the WGA East. And
wow, that's great.
It feels great, like actually helping people. Now, likewise, I I haven't written on one of these in 3 years. I've only ever written on one of them, and it was largely because I was.
You, if I'm not mistaken, you may have put some words into the mouth of a John Cena, if I'm not mistaken.
You better believe I did. You better believe I did.
When I saw this, I legit giggled.
Yeah.
So you worked on the 64th Man, which is a John Cena Audible podcast series. I apologize. I don't remember what it was about. I did listen to the like free one that they gave out.
Right.
Because I was like, I want to hear what John Cena sounds like. And when I saw that your name was attached, I just giggled.
Yeah, I mean, I was just a staff writer on it. Yeah. And like, I loved it. But also, like, I'm not involved that much with like radio drama, but I've gotten to meet a lot of people who are aggressively involved in radio drama. And like, they're selling shows and they're getting paid more because of the stuff that I've done. Like, I have helped organize, and not just me, obviously. It's like, this is a
team. Yeah, sure, of course.
And also, like, all of us. It's because of what they've done as well as what I've done. Like, that's part of what union building is, and that's part of organizing. But, like, it's been very rewarding. And there have been times during this that I'm like, every once in a while, I'm like, I know I'm good at this. I'm like, I am definitely, because I get feedback that I'm good at helping organize this stuff. And, I've butt heads with people, but at the same time, that is part of the way of getting forward in these like union organizations. And I'm very pro union across the board. And
right.
But there have also been times where, a friend of mine has been like, if you ever wanted, a friend of mine at the WGA was like, if you ever wanted like to get involved in organizing, you have a job here. Like you could not a job at this union, but you would have a very successful career doing this. And like I think because of the pandemic, I was like, maybe because like this is the only validation I've gotten is through this.
Right.
But then I think about it and I'm like, no, I want to keep writing and I want to keep performing because that's what I really love to do.
Yeah.
But
and there's also something to be said about the stage too. And I'm sure I've mentioned on this show because I talk to a lot of creatives and we often fall into the same topics over and over again of like social media and the desire and the click. And I think like the click is the ultimate evil. Like if it was up to me, no social media would have any likes or view counts. It would just be comments. Like, yeah, if you want to engage, then you have to actually write a sentence as a human being and share your opinions versus literally the least you could do, which is I like this or not acknowledging it. And then somehow that becomes equity. But that's another thing. Like I don't know if you are innately this way or if you do struggle with this, regardless of the fact that you are very successful in front of a crowd, that you've consistently through your career filled up, venues with countless individuals who've come out to see the work that you've done. But I always try to remember my days as a stand-up. And if I'm putting out, I did a sketch web series, and it's sketches loosely. I tried to make it like, our goal was like live action Robot Chicken, where it's more just about the speed and the absurdity than necessarily the sketch format, right? And also, in my opinion, sketch is an audience. Like sketch, there's no without an audience, it's just comedy. it's not right. But I digress. And I remember we put that out, and we worked really hard on that, and me and my partner Tony Wayne. And just like nobody cared, and it's one of those things. But I look at like the view counts, and and I think to myself like, all right, like, I don't even know what they are because I haven't looked at it in years. But let's say we've got 1,000 to 2,000 people that have viewed it. If I put on a show, and that many people showed up to a show, I would be on cloud nine. That would be the biggest success in the world. But because we have this imaginary bar that we've set on ourselves because of other people's web success. We tend to not see things that way. We tend to think like, oh, yeah, if you have a show and 200 people come, that's great. But if you have a video and you're not in the millions or whatever your number is that you think is successful, do you ever kind of quantify the two of those things?
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've had so many online disappointments where I'm like, no one's seen this, no one cares about this, or myself and this team Brinkman, that was a UCB think team. We put out a whole web series called Life Support that I think is one of the best things I've ever been involved in, and it's just about. I think I've come a little ways as an actor, but I felt very good. About it
I mean, I can't watch myself in anything for more than a year ago. I just released my feature this year, and I shot that thing 4 years ago.
Oh yeah,
and. Even like everything about that, I go like, oh God, if I could just travel back in time and smack myself around. Oh God. That's the hardest part about doing anything that's not sketch. See, that's the benefit of doing live comedy is that you come up with it, you perform it, people see it, and it's over.
Yeah, you don't have to see it ever again.
Yeah, but when you shoot something, you can watch it forever, and by the time it's done, usually you're already better than when you start.
Yeah, it also doesn't help that I was acting alongside Chet Siegel and Laura Wilcox, who are both so fucking good in this, and then it's just me like hamming it up and doing like
it's you being like, I'm Dru Johnston.
It's terrible.
Doing like zany voices, like, what are you doing? He's like, this character lost his wife, and you're like, yeah, but I thought it'd be funny if he had googly eyes.
I know. Right, Drew. It's like, okay, Drew, but it's weird. I mean, I loved it, and but it got maybe 1,000 views total, and then like got taken down, and then we re-put it up, and now it has like 7 views.
It got taken down?
Why UCB took it down.
Oh, because it was on their channel. Oh,
yeah, something happened.
Don't get me started on that. Yeah.
So anyway, like we did this, and like I still love it. But the other thing about it is like I look at some of my most successful friends, like titans of like the television writing industry. They are on every show. They are like unbelievable writers, and they have 300 to 400 followers on Twitter, and like
It's different if they're
successful.
if they're in front of the camera. Obviously, that's also a big part of it for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm also kind of like looking at it. I'm like, wait. Like, why am I at all judging success of online stuff when I know some of the most successful people I know don't have like a Twitter at all, or have a small number of people tweeting. I mean, that's it.
And again, on top of that, what I said earlier, the most talented people aren't even getting the work that these people are doing. Like, so there's this crazy hierarchy of like the most talented people probably not working, very talented people working that aren't huge, that aren't quote famous, whatever that means. And then there's like the insanely famous and hardworking people that are doing great, and that's like they're the people that are ruining it for everybody else. because like you said, we're all sensitive. We're all like, I feel like in order to be a decent enough storyteller, like, we hear stories about how A, B, and C is a sociopath. I like to think that where their art took them turned them into a sociopath before they were a sociopath. To get to tell any decent story as an actor, as a writer, as a director, as a whatever, you need to be a little bit empathetic because you have to understand human emotion to tell a decent story. Generally, if you're empathetic, you're probably a bit sensitive. If you're a bit sensitive, you're probably a bit insecure. So literally, like that's the hierarchy there. So everybody that you've ever seen that's made an art for you is at some point in their life worried that they don't belong, or that for me, my big struggle is like bitterness. Like that's the thing that I have to try to hinder, because it's like you talk about like, I see all of these people that are succeeding and they're doing great work. You did the nice thing of saying like, look, they don't have this thing and I should feel good about myself. I tend to go the other way, and I go like, well, why do they have it? Why aren't I'm very bad about that, and I'm working through it. I'm trying to be better.
I think we all have those. Like I think everyone in the field does have a little bit, and I think that is why a lot of social media is poison. It's because a lot of it is like all you're seeing is people putting out the life that they want you to think they have, or
again, I know to come back to it, but that's one of the things that's so incredible about Teaser Jess, that like you literally put out a show, you go like, I'm sad, this is awful, and this is the TV show we're making. Like, who does that? It's fantastic.
Well, I mean, that's Chris.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. But you know what? You're all privy to it. You're all part. Like it's. I mean, you're as much of that show as anybody whose name is on it. You know what I mean? Like, but man, Drew, there's so much that we didn't even scratch the surface of. But I feel like I could talk to you for probably hours. I might ask that you have to come back for another episode one day in the near future, just so we can continue to chat about.
Look, as long as there's a deadly virus roaming the air, there's not much place that I can go.
Let's hope that there isn't. But so looking ahead, obviously, like hopefully we'll see you back on stage sometime soon. You're an LA person now. You're here. You probably, I don't know where you live, but you're probably not too far from me. God knows I hope to see you in person at least one day fairly soon when it's safe to do so. Do you have anything specifically on the horizon other than like the stuff that you're working on?
No, not really. I mean, I had a small role in this film Lapsus that just came out. It's a sci-fi movie that Noah Hutton wrote and directed, which is really great.
Lapsus?
Lapsus, Lapsis.
Is that available?
It's available on filmmovement.com. Okay. And then you can also get it from like iTunes or any of the on-demand
You can purchase
places.
It for a distributor. Got it.
Right. Yeah. It went to, it was supposed to debut South by Southwest in like 2020, but then that got canceled.
Of course.
And now it's just been going. But it's a beautiful film
Nice.
that this guy Mike Gomes DP'd, and Noah wrote a really great script, and Dean, who plays the lead, is great, and it's a really great movie. Other than that, I'm like working on scripts. Just finished a pilot and sending it around, seeing any kind of traction I can get, and just trying to, get to know LA. I mean, just trying out a lot of the breweries
in the weirdest time to try to get to know LA too. Like
I had a lot of canned beers. I'm telling you that.
I can only imagine. Now, is this your first time when you moved to LA? Had you been here previously for work?
I've been here for like a week tops.
Okay.
So I'd never been here, and I've always just crashed on like friends' couches.
Sure.
So this is the
I
first
do
time.
feel like you're like the only person who's lived in LA for 6 months who's probably never seen like Los Angeles.
No. I know Griffith Park inside and out. That's the extent of it.
Of course. Well, you have to. You heard about it on a podcast once or on it. So it was the first place you had to go to. Follow Drew at Drew with a U, Johnston with an H. Does that work? Does that make sense?
With
to people?
an H and a T, yeah.
Dru with a U, Johnston, at Dru Johnston on both Twitter and I think you're on Instagram there as well. Listen, we just talked forever about social media presence. Follow Dru at Dru Johnston. Tell him he's beautiful. If you're enjoying the show, please do us a favor. Give us a 5-star rating. Check out all the other great shows on Dragon Wagon Radio. If you're enjoying it, show us some support by snagging some merch at thedragonwagonshop.com. We've got mugs, we've got t-shirts, we've got masks. Cover your damn face. Wear a mask. You can wear a mask with the logo to this program or one of the other fantastic programs on Dragon Wagon Radio. Follow at Elaborate Pod on all social media if you want to follow the show for new episode releases. Follow me at Jake Lloyd Bacon on all social media. And hey, do me a favor. Check out my debut feature film, Pinch, available right now on Amazon Prime for purchase or rental. And that'll do it. Dru, this has been such an absolute blast. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
To everybody listening, as I say at the end of each and every one of these, please be an artist, not an influencer. Create art, not content. Dru, I love you.
Dude, this was great. Thank you so much.
Hey, everybody. I am sitting here with the delightfully tacky yet unrefined Zen Zenith.
I'm taken aback by that.
That's literally the slogan to Hooters. I don't know why. It just popped in my head.
Well, that's when I think me, I think Hooters. Thanks, Jake. So yeah, I'm here on your podcast to talk about my podcast.
You
right?
are. You have a
or
really...
am I just here for you to compare me to Hooters?
You have a really incredible podcast. All jokes aside, it is one of my absolute favorite experiences because I love discovering music through live performance,
right.
Especially intimate live performances, and that is exactly what your show is.
Right. Once a month, we meet at your apartment, and we have a couple artists here who play in front of a live audience. And then I talk to them, we do a Q&A with the audience, and the whole thing gets recorded for your listening pleasure.
3 of my new favorite artists are from the House Show
Yeah,
show.
me too, man. It's such a pleasure to get to meet such talented folks, and you can check it all out for yourself at thehouseshowshow.com or on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else you might listen to podcasts.
So do just that.
It's Dragon Wagon.